Watch your six, princess. That was the laugh that followed Rowan Pierce as she climbed into her Apache. To them, she was just a little girl, too soft, too small for real combat. But in the Sanhin Valley, 300 Marines were minutes away from annihilation, and the only Apache pilot within range was Chief Warrant Officer Rowan Pierce. Under a storm of RPGs and gunfire, she dropped low into the canyon, weaving through tracer rounds with her rotors just feet from the rock walls. She executed maneuvers no manual dared to teach, flying as if the Apache itself had a will to survive. What happened next turned mockery into silence, and her name into legend. How does someone dismissed as too little become the warrior who rewrote battlefield history? Rowan Pierce stepped off the transport plane into the blistering Afghan sun, the dust of Camp Bastion swirling around her boots like a reminder that she was entering someone else's territory. Even in uniform, even with her rank stitched plainly on her chest, the looks she received were the same: skeptical, dismissive, as though she had wandered into a place reserved for men and war-hardened veterans. To them, she wasn't a warrior arriving for deployment. She was a young woman with bright eyes, a slight frame, and what they assumed was an untested record. The air itself seemed to whisper, "What is she doing here?" Her introduction to the base's culture came fast and sharp. Major Thomas Garrett, the operations officer, eyed her during the first briefing. His expression carried that thin smile soldiers recognized instantly as contempt, masked as politeness. "Welcome to Bastion, Chief Pierce," he said, emphasizing her rank in a way that made it sound like a punchline. Then, almost as if he couldn't resist, he added, "You'll start with base overwatch flights. Low risk, circle the perimeter. Think of it as practice until you've got the hang of things." The room chuckled. Rowan forced a polite nod, though inside her chest tightened. This wasn't her first war zone. She knew Overwatch assignments were code for, "We don't trust you yet." The mechanics weren't subtler. When she climbed into her Apache for the first time at Bastion, one of the crew chiefs muttered, "Watch your six, princess," loud enough for the laughter to ripple through the hangar. The others smirked, shaking their heads as if the very idea of her flying combat missions was a dangerous joke. They saw her as a liability, someone who might break under pressure and bring others down with her. Rowan didn't reply. She had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than words, but their laughter echoed, embedding itself like shrapnel in her memory. What no one at Bastion cared to know was that Rowan Pierce had been raised for this. She grew up in rural Montana, where her father, a former Army mechanic who had once kept UH-1 Huey helicopters flying in the years after Vietnam, kept an old decommissioned Huey in a weathered barn. To most kids, barns meant hay and cattle. To Rowan, it meant the smell of hydraulic fluid, the gleam of rotor blades catching sunlight, the patient lessons of a father who saw his daughter's fascination and chose to nurture it. By the age of 10, she could strip down a gearbox faster than some certified mechanics. By 15, she understood torque coefficients and blade pitch adjustments in a way that impressed even her father. Her bond with helicopters wasn't just technical, it was visceral. Her father taught her to feel the aircraft, to sense when something was off not by waiting for an instrument warning, but by the subtle change in vibration under her hands. To Rowan, helicopters were living creatures, machines with hearts of steel that spoke in ways only a few could understand. That bond would one day save lives, but at Bastion, nobody asked. Nobody cared. They only saw what they wanted to see, a woman in a cockpit that to them belonged to men. What they also didn't know, and what Rowan kept carefully sealed away, was that her record wasn't just impressive, it was legendary in circles that weren't allowed to talk about it. Before arriving at Bastion, she had flown 3 classified deployments with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. In those shadowy missions over Syria, Yemen, and Somalia, she had flown low and silent, delivering operators into the most dangerous corners of the world and pulling them out under fire. Her call sign, unknown to these men, was whispered with respect among those who lived because of her. Yet here, in the open world of conventional units, she was just the girl pilot. This is where commentary cuts through the narrative. Rowan's story isn't unique. In countless militaries, women stepping into combat roles face the same skepticism. They are judged not on skill or record, but on appearance and stereotype. If a man stumbles in training, he's an individual with a flaw. If a woman stumbles, it becomes proof that all women don't belong. The burden is doubled. Not only must she perform her duty, she must constantly prove that her gender does not define her ability. Rowan embodied this tension the moment she set foot in Bastion. Her every action weighed twice, her every mistake waiting to be magnified. The irony, of course, is that war does not care about stereotypes. Bullets and RPGs do not pause to check gender. In the Sanhin Valley, in the moments that would soon unfold, the only thing that mattered was skill, instinct, and courage. And yet, before that valley, Rowan had to endure the daily gauntlet of whispers, smirks, and dismissive orders. She carried herself with discipline, but inside she carried a quiet resolve to show them. Not by words, not by protest, but by the only language that mattered in war, the execution of impossible missions. As the dust storm swirled over Bastion and the engines of Apaches roared in the distance, Rowan prepared herself for the inevitable. She knew the moment would come when the mocking would stop. She didn't know when, she didn't know how, but she felt it deep in her bones. Machines had a will to survive, and so did she. Rowan Pierce's first weeks at Camp Bastion followed a pattern as predictable as the desert sunrise. Every morning she suited up, strapped into her Apache, and lifted off, only to circle the skies around the base like a hawk chained to its perch. Base overwatch, Garrett had called it. Safe missions. Low threat, he said. Good training for you to get comfortable. Comfortable. The word stung worse than an insult. She wasn't here for comfort. She had more flight hours in combat zones than half the battalion combined, but to them, she was still a rookie in need of babysitting. While other pilots were flying convoy escorts through hostile valleys or supporting raids deep into contested territory, Rowan was condemned to fly endless circles over tents, watchtowers, and airstrips. From above, she could see dust devils spinning across the desert floor, convoys kicking up trails in the distance, missions she should have been on, missions where her skills mattered. Instead, she orbited home base, listening to chatter on the comms that reminded her exactly how little they trusted her. The break in monotony came during a joint pre-flight inspection. It was routine, the kind of maintenance check crews could do in their sleep. Another Apache sat on the tarmac, its pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Anderson, eager to get airborne. Rowan moved with quiet precision, her hands running along control rods, linkages, the rotor system. Then she froze. There, subtle, nearly invisible, fine hairline cracks etched into the pitch links of the main rotor. Stress fractures. To the untrained eye, they look like scratches from tools or dust in the desert sun. But Rowan felt it the moment her fingers traced the metal. She had grown up in a barn with a Huey above her head. She knew what fatigue looked like, even in its earliest whispers. "Hold up," she said. "This aircraft isn't safe to fly." Anderson frowned. "What are you talking about?" She pointed to the fractures. "These are stress lines. If you push this rotor system under combat load, it'll fail within hours." Anderson's expression hardened. Around them, a few mechanics leaned in, curious. He pulled back his helmet strap and laughed, though his eyes didn't match the sound. "What? Are you trying to ground my bird so you can steal my mission slot?" "Nice try." Her jaw tightened. "I'm trying to keep you alive." The tension thickened. Voices rose. The argument spilled into the hangar until finally Lieutenant Colonel Torres arrived, summoned by the commotion. Rowan stood firm, pointing again to the evidence no one wanted to see. Torres didn't argue. He ordered metallurgical testing immediately. Hours later, the results confirmed it. Rowan was right. That Apache would have suffered catastrophic failure within 10 flight hours. It should have been a victory. In another world, her colleagues would have thanked her, recognized her sharp eye, maybe even admitted that her instincts were worth trusting. But Bastion wasn't that world. Instead, the whispers spread. Anderson painted her as a by-the-book pilot too rigid for combat, someone who would hesitate at the wrong moment and get people killed. He told anyone who'd listen that she had embarrassed him in front of the battalion just to climb the ladder faster. The truth, that she had just saved his life, was drowned beneath the louder story of resentment. That evening, Rowan sat alone in her containerized housing unit, the thin metal walls rattling with the desert wind. The day's heat clung to the air, oppressive, unrelenting. She pulled a small box from her footlocker and opened it carefully. Inside lay her father's Huey flight badge, tarnished by time but still gleaming faintly in the dim light. She held it in her palm, thumb brushing the edges, remembering his words. Machines will tell you when something's wrong, if you're willing to listen. He had lived through his own gauntlet of doubt. Too young, too slight, too book-smart for the rough-and-ready world of combat aviation, they had said. Yet he'd flown over 1,000 missions in Vietnam, earning medals he never bragged about. Rowan saw herself reflected in that legacy, a cycle repeating itself across generations. And here lay the cruel commentary of her reality. For women like Rowan, skepticism wasn't an obstacle to overcome once. It was a shadow that followed everywhere. Each new unit, each new commander, each new peer meant starting over, reproving what had already been proven. A man's mistake was a stumble, a woman's mistake was evidence, and even her successes, like saving Anderson from a mid-air death, were twisted into weapons against her. Yet in that small, sweltering room, Rowan made a vow. She would not break, and she would not ask for approval. When the storm came, and she knew it would, her answer would not be in arguments or explanations. It would be written in the sky, in the sound of her Apache's rotors cutting through chaos. And when that moment arrived, there would be no denying what she was capable of. The emergency call came just after dusk, when the desert sky burned with streaks of fading light. Rowan Pierce had been in the air for nearly 6 hours, circling Camp Bastion in yet another monotonous overwatch patrol. Her Apache's rotors hummed steadily above the endless sea of sand, the cockpit heat suffocating, her flight suit damp with sweat. The mission had been uneventful until the radio exploded with panic. Chaos 33 to any station. We're taking fire in the Sanhin Valley. Troops in contact. Heavy RPGs, mortars, casualties mounting. Any station, immediate support required. The voice was ragged, desperate, cutting through static. Rowan stiffened. Sanhin Valley, 40 kilometers north. The valley was infamous among Marines, narrow, boxed in, with sheer cliffs that turned convoys into sitting targets. If a force was ambushed there, the canyon became a death trap. Rowan keyed her radio. Bastion control, this is Viper 23. I'm airborne, fully armed, 10 minutes out from Sanhin Valley, requesting immediate clearance to provide close air support. The reply came quickly, sharp and dismissive. Major Garrett's voice. Negative, Viper 23. Return to base. Experienced crews are launching. You'll stand down. Her hands tightened on the controls. Sir, I have 16 Hellfires, 76 Hydras, and 1,200 rounds of 30 Mike. Marines are pinned, and I'm the only bird in range. I can be overhead in 10. Viper 23, you heard me. RTB, do not engage. For a moment, the cockpit felt smaller, heavier. She could picture the faces of the mechanics who mocked her, Garrett's smirk when he called her safe pilot, the whispers after the rotor incident. They all wanted her silent, circling safely above tents. Not where the fight was real, but outside in that canyon, 300 Marines were minutes from annihilation. Before she could respond, another voice broke through. The Joint Terminal Attack Controller, the JTAC embedded with the pinned Marines. His voice cracked with urgency. Any station, this is Chaos 33. We need air support now. Immediate support or we're done here. Static followed, then silence. Rowan's breath came shallow, the weight of the decision pressing against her chest. She wasn't supposed to break orders. Disobeying Garrett could end her career, maybe worse. But obeying meant listening to 300 men die while she sat 10 minutes away with a fully armed Apache. Then a third voice cut across the net. Firm, steady, Lieutenant Colonel Torres. Viper 23, report your ordnance again. Rowan didn't hesitate. 16 Hellfires, 76 Hydras, 1,200 rounds, 30 Mike, sir. A pause. She imagined Torres in the command center, staring at the map, weighing doctrine against desperation. Finally, his voice came back, resolute. Viper 23, you are cleared hot. Chaos 33 will provide terminal control. Show them what you've got. Relief surged through her veins like fire. Her Apache seemed to respond with her, the machine eager to unleash its fury. She shoved the cyclic forward, the engines roaring as the helicopter surged north toward the Sanhin Valley. The ground blurred beneath her as she pushed the Apache to its limits. Her helmet huste lit up with waypoints, but her eyes were already on the horizon, on the faint smoke rising from the canyon. The JTAC came back breathless. Viper, we've got machine guns in the rocks, mortars on the ridgeline, RPGs closing from the east. Friendlies within 100 meters of all targets. Danger close. Danger close confirmed, Rowan replied, calm cutting through chaos. Talk me in. As the Apache streaked toward the valley, Rowan knew this was more than combat. It was a reckoning. Garrett's order had been clear. Return, wait for others, stay safe. But Garrett wasn't in that canyon, staring at dying Marines. Courage, she realized, wasn't measured by obedience. It was measured by the willingness to take on the burden of choice when lives hung in the balance. This is where commentary matters. Militaries are built on discipline, on chain of command, and for good reason, without order, chaos reigns. But history shows that in moments of crisis, the bravest acts often come from those willing to bend or break orders to do what is right. Rowan's defiance wasn't reckless ego, it was moral clarity. She wasn't flying for her reputation or to prove Garrett wrong. She was flying because men on the ground had called for help, and she had the power to answer. The Sanhin Valley loomed ahead, the canyon walls jagged and dark against the fading light. Through her targeting system, heat signatures glowed. Clusters of Taliban fighters moving, guns flashing, mortars firing in arcs. Below them, Marines were huddled behind burning vehicles, their positions collapsing. Rowan's heart pounded, but her voice was steady as she radioed in. Chaos 33, Viper 23 on station. Full load, ready for your mark. The JTAC didn't waste words. Machine gun nest, North Ridge, grid coordinates, danger close. Rowan lined up, fingers moving with practiced precision. She had made her choice. She wasn't circling Bastion anymore. She was here, in the fight where she belonged. And with every second that passed, the line between orders and courage grew clearer. The storm had come, and Rowan Pierce was flying straight into its heart. The Sanhin Valley erupted in fire the moment Rowan Pierce's Apache crested the ridgeline. Through her thermal sight, enemy gun barrels glowed like angry coals, their bursts cutting across the canyon in lethal arcs. Below, Marines were huddled behind burning Humvees, pinned with nowhere to go. The air crackled with tracer rounds, each streak a reminder that hesitation meant death. Rowan's jaw clenched. This was her battlefield now. She banked hard, targeting the first machine gun nest dug into the northern ridge. The targeting reticle flashed red as she locked on. Chaos 33, Viper, I've got the nest. Rifle. The Hellfire missile streaked away with a thunderous roar, its motor leaving a comet tail against the dark canyon sky. A second later, the nest vanished in an orange bloom, enemy silhouettes flung into the air. The Marines below cheered faintly over comms, their relief audible even through static. One threat down, but dozens more to go. She didn't wait. Pivoting left, she rolled the Apache low along the canyon wall, hugging terrain so tight the rotors seemed to scrape stone. Another mortar team was setting up on the ridgeline. Hydras, away! A ripple of rockets screamed out, slamming into the position before the crew could fire. Dust and shrapnel filled the air. Through her sight, Rowan watched enemy fighters scatter like ants, their coordination collapsing under the sudden rain of precision death. But the canyon answered back. RPG trails streaked past her canopy, one detonating close enough to rattle the cockpit and shower the glass with fragments. The Apache shuddered, but held steady under her grip. She dropped lower, pulling into the shadow of a rock outcropping, heart pounding but movements fluid. This was where instinct took over, where she and the helicopter merged, each feeding the other's will to survive. Chaos 33, danger close. Friendlies 100 meters south of target, the JTAC warned. Roger, danger close, Rowan replied, already angling in. The M230 chain gun beneath her nose thundered to life, each burst of 30mm fire shaking the canyon. The rounds tore through enemy positions, concrete bunkers collapsing under relentless impact. Smoke curled upward, obscuring the stars, the sound rolling through the valley like a storm unleashed. Then came the maneuver that shouldn't have been possible. She yanked the cyclic, pulling the Apache into a pedal turn, spinning the entire gunship sideways while fully loaded. The textbooks called it reckless. Instructors warned it risked rotor stall, loss of control, catastrophic failure. But Rowan had learned in the Night Stalkers that textbooks didn't fight wars. Pilots did, and in that moment, the impossible maneuver was the only way to bring her nose cannon onto a hidden RPG team. The helicopter skidded sideways, tracer fire slashing past. Rowan squeezed the trigger. The chain gun erupted, the RPG team obliterated before they could fire. For a heartbeat, the canyon fell silent, then erupted again as her rotors clawed back stability and she dove for the next target. For 23 relentless minutes, she wove her Apache through the valley like a phantom. Pop up, strike, disappear. Every maneuver threaded the needle between brilliance and disaster. RPGs arced toward her only to miss by meters as she dipped behind stone. Mortar positions crumbled under her hydras. Machine gun nests fell silent under chain gun fire. Her voice remained calm, professional, though sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. The Marines watched from below, first in disbelief, then in awe. To them, it was like watching an impossible dance. An Apache twisting and rolling through a canyon as if guided by instinct, moving with precision where any mistake meant death. Just an hour earlier, they had resigned themselves to being overrun. Now they were watching salvation descend on rotor blades. Commentary here is crucial. The AH-64 Apache was never designed to fly the way Rowan pushed it. Doctrine emphasizes altitude, standoff distance, and layered strikes, safe, predictable engagements that minimize risk to the aircraft. But doctrine assumes time, assumes support, assumes options. Rowan had none of those. What she had instead was the mindset drilled into her by the 160th SOAR: adapt, improvise, and embrace the danger if it meant saving lives. The pedal turn, the terrain masking, the willingness to fly danger close to within 100 meters of friendly forces, these were maneuvers instructors lectured about as never do. Yet Rowan did them, not out of recklessness, but out of necessity. She trusted her instincts, trusted her machine, and trusted that surviving combat sometimes required breaking every rule written in peacetime manuals. By the time her ammunition was nearly spent, the valley had transformed. 17 enemy fighting positions were gone. Mortar fire ceased. The relentless pressure on the Marines broke, replaced by the sight of enemy fighters retreating into the darkness. Chaos 33 to Viper 23, the JTAC's voice came through, this time steady, reverent. Whoever you are up there, you just saved 300 Marines. Rowan exhaled slowly, her hands steady on the controls, though her heart raced. Just doing my job, she replied. But in the operations center back at Bastion, the silence was heavy. They had just witnessed maneuvers thought impossible, executed with deadly precision. Major Garrett, the man who had dismissed her as unfit for combat, stood frozen before the drone feed. Torres, meanwhile, said nothing, but a faint smile crossed his face. He had known, and now everyone else knew too. In the Sanhin Valley, under the shadow of fire and steel, Rowan Pierce had turned mockery into awe. She was no longer the little girl too soft for combat. She was Ghost Rider, etched into legend by 23 minutes of defying both enemies and expectations. The Sanhin Valley went quiet. Smoke drifted upward in ragged columns, tracer fire fading into the night until only the thrum of Rowan Pierce's Apache filled the air. For the Marines below, silence meant survival. For the operations center at Camp Bastion, silence meant awe. The comms crackled again, this time with the steady voice of Marine Colonel Stevens, the battalion commander on the ground. His tone carried the weight of disbelief wrapped in gratitude. Bastion Control, I need to know, who was flying that Apache? There was a pause, everyone in the command center glancing toward Torres. He pressed the transmit button calmly, his voice clear. That was Chief Warrant Officer 3 Rowan Pierce, Colonel. The reply came quick, laced with shock. Holy, you mean Ghost Rider Pierce? Why didn't anyone tell me she was in theater? Gasps swept through the room. Officers looked at each other, stunned, while Garrett's face drained of color. The name carried weight, a call sign whispered with reverence by special operators, a phantom who had saved teams from Syria to Somalia. Ghost Rider wasn't a myth after all. She was here, flying under their noses, dismissed as too small for combat. Within hours, the news spread across Camp Bastion. Maintenance crews whispered it first, then junior pilots, then senior officers. The new girl? The one Garrett sidelined? That was Ghost Rider. By morning, everyone knew. When Rowan's Apache touched down, the ground was still hot with the smell of oil and sand. She powered down the engines, the rotors slowing until the battlefield roar faded into an uneasy stillness. Climbing down the ladder, her flight suit soaked with sweat, she expected the usual smirks, the whispers waiting to undermine her. Instead, the same crew chief who once mocked her with, "Watch your six, princess," now stood at attention. His hand rose in a sharp salute. One by one, others followed. Mechanics, pilots, Marines, forming an impromptu line of respect. No words, no laughter, just silence and salutes. For the first time since arriving at Bastion, Rowan felt the weight lift, not because their doubt had vanished, but because she had burned it away in fire and steel. Later, she was summoned to Torres's office. The lieutenant colonel leaned back in his chair, studying her with a measured calm. On his desk lay her complete service file, its cover stamped with red classified markings. "You know," Torres began, "the day you caught the rotor fractures, I pulled your file. I knew exactly who you were, but I didn't tell them." Rowan frowned. "Why?" "Because if I had," Torres said evenly, "they never would have believed it. You needed to show them yourself, and now you have." There was no arrogance in his voice, only a recognition of truth. Rowan nodded slowly, understanding. Sometimes revelation had to come not by words, but by undeniable action. Garrett was harder to face. The man who had relegated her to safe missions now avoided her eyes in the briefing room. But weeks later, when her tour was nearing its end, Garrett requested a private meeting. He shifted uncomfortably, his pride clearly at war with his conscience. "Pierce," he said, "I misjudged you. I see that now. When your tour is over, I'd like to recommend you as an instructor at the aviation center. We could use someone who knows what you know." It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was a crack in the wall of arrogance, a sign that respect had taken root where doubt once lived. Rowan accepted with a simple nod. She didn't need his words. She had already earned something far greater. Here the commentary becomes clear. Leadership is not about holding rank or barking orders. It's about recognizing talent, even when it comes in forms you don't expect. Too often, leaders like Garrett mistake conformity for competence and let bias blind them to extraordinary ability. Torres understood that true recognition can't be handed down as a gift. It has to be earned in the crucible of action. Rowan proved that day what all underestimated soldiers know. Respect isn't granted. It's carved out of fire, risk, and undeniable results. The Marines she saved began calling her name with pride. Ghost Rider Pierce was painted onto a wooden sign outside a new forward operating base established in the valley. Every Marine who walked past it remembered the night salvation came from the sky. Rowan never bragged, never reminded anyone of the smirks or the whispers. She didn't need to. The salutes, the silence, the name etched into legend, those were louder than any words. The Sanhin Valley did not stay forgotten. Weeks after the ambush, a forward operating base was established on the very ground where 300 Marines had nearly been lost. The entrance bore a simple wooden sign painted by rough hands with black letters, "Pierce, Fob." No ceremony, no fanfare, just a tribute carved into the dust and grit of the valley. For the Marines who had lived through that night, the name needed no explanation. It was the marker of survival. Rowan Pierce returned to Bastion with little celebration. She carried herself the same as she always had, calm, steady, unshaken. But now when she walked across the flight line, silence no longer carried mockery. Salutes met her path. Mechanics who once smirked at her now stood taller in her presence. And when she strapped into her Apache, even the most skeptical eyes softened with trust. Months later, when her tour ended, she accepted Garrett's reluctant invitation to teach at the Army Aviation Center of Excellence. It was not revenge that drove her to take the post. It was the belief that her experience could shape the next generation. On her first day as an instructor, she faced a room full of young pilots. Some sat with arms crossed, doubt etched plainly on their faces. Rowan smiled faintly. She knew that look. She had seen it before. Her first lesson began with a single sentence. Never judge a pilot by their appearance. The smallest ones often fly the biggest missions. The room quieted. The cadets leaned in. They could feel that she wasn't quoting a textbook. She was speaking from a battlefield carved into her memory. In the evenings, Rowan often thought back to Montana, to the old barn where a decommissioned Huey sat beneath a sagging roof. As a child, she had climbed its frame, traced its rotors, and listened to her father's voice echoing through the rafters. Machines will tell you when something's wrong, if you're willing to listen. That wisdom had followed her into every cockpit, through every storm of tracer fire and RPGs. Her father had once been doubted for being too young, too slight, too bookish. Now, years later, his daughter had carried that same burden, faced the same skepticism, and overcome it in her own way. The cycle had come full circle, where once she sat in a barn learning from him, now her lessons carried forward to cadets who would fly into their own battles. Her story was no longer just hers. It was part of a lineage of hidden heroes whose greatness was revealed not in titles, but in action. In the end, Rowan Pierce's story isn't just about helicopters, battlefields, or medals. It's about the weight of perception and the courage it takes to rise above it. In every generation, there are people who are underestimated. The employee who looks too quiet for leadership, the student dismissed as too shy, the neighbor thought too old to make a difference. And yet history and our own lives are full of moments when those very people become the ones who carry others through the fire. For many watching today, especially older Americans who have lived through decades of change, this lesson rings familiar. We have seen entire movements, communities, and families shaped by individuals who were overlooked until their actions spoke louder than prejudice. Respect should never be withheld until proven, yet too often it is. Rowan's story reminds us to ask, do we judge too quickly? Do we miss the quiet strength right in front of us? So here's the question I leave you with. In your own life, do you believe respect should be earned through action or given freely until someone loses it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, and your story might inspire someone else watching. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If stories of hidden heroism and timeless lessons resonate with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder of unseen courage. Until next time, remember, sometimes the smallest figure casts the longest shadow.